Welcome back to another reading and correcting. With me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today, we are doing chapter 37 of The Captain's Heart. He slammed the prototype into the recycler, knowing he should be more careful with it, but not caring. As if subliminals in his quarters wasn't bad enough. Okay, I will be changing this term to ultrasonics. A reader's comment made me realize that there is what subliminal has an established definition already. And their words, somebody telling you what to do, and that is not what I'm going for here. So I'll be changing that to ultrasonic. I'm not doing it right now because I have to go through a lot of chapters for that. But okay, anyway, just an advice, just so that in future chapter when you see this shifting, you'll know why. As if subliminals in his quarters wasn't bad enough, his medicine, the drugs that he'd been taking since he'd been a teen, were more mind-altering drugs. Okay. His medicine. Okay, the medicine, not his. The medicine. The medicine he'd been taking. He'd been taking since. The medicine he'd been taking since he'd been a teen were more mind-altering drugs than anything designed to keep him healthy. He hadn't gotten everything the Kelsirian nurse had told him. Chemistry wasn't a field Jeremy was an expert in, but he'd gotten what that they made him susceptible to suggestions. Another prototype slammed into the recycler. How many of a decision had been his own over his life? Was he on this station because someone had suggested it? Was how disconnected he felt from the people around him because someone had told him to? Was he an engineer because someone wanted him to be one? Get a grip, Jeremy. He paused in the process of shoving the last prototype into the last prototype in the recycler. He really should take it back to the lab. Only he'd already taken all the ratings. It would end up in recycler. It would end up recycled there too. The only difference was that the system in his lab would keep track of all the base element it processed. He dropped the item in the recycler. Who fucking cared if the inventory was off? They could always pull from the station's supply. How likely was it that they could make him susceptible to the point he acted against his nature? Keeping him from acting according to his nature had taken constant reinforcement. If they could change him. Okay. That is another phrase. If they could change him so much that he'd decide to work on the furthest station when he didn't want to, wouldn't that mean they could take away his attraction to other men completely? The alternative was that they'd done something, that they'd done this out of cruelty. As pissed as he was, he couldn't imagine them doing that to him. Jeremy wasn't important enough to bother to that point if there was a permanent alternative. He looked over his room. The floor was clear of everything. Every piece of clothing had been thrown in the wash processor. Why had that been so hard? The fucking access port was in the shower room, barely a dozen steps, and his dirty clothing would have been cleaned, folded, and placed in the closet. He had to give him being pissed this. It did wonders for him cleaning his quarters. The door buzzed, and he ignored it, undoing his bed. He couldn't remember the last time he changed those, and he wasn't sleeping on unwashed bedding tonight. It buzzed again. He wasn't dealing with him. Not today. Not after Jeremy realized that his so-called friend had been part of. What his so-called friend had been part of. It's not like it could be anyone else. None of his other friends, if they were even that, bothered him when he was in his quarters. He glared when it buzzed again. What had he ever done to deserve being treated this way? Are you okay? Jeremy rounded on Omar, standing in the open doorway, looking concerned, and stared in disbelief. He'd forced his way in. The guy who had been feeding him drugs without his knowledge since the first day he'd arrived had used his medical override and forced his way into his private quarters. Jeremy was wrong. Oh, he was going to tell him what was fucking wrong and reveal he knew everything. Fuck. He couldn't make the man who'd manipulated him pay without making things worse. I'm having a bad day, he managed to say through gritted teeth. Omar chuckled nervously. I can kind of see that. You want to go grab a drink and talk about it? No. He took the sheet to the sheets plural. Now the sheet, yeah, plural. To the wash processor. So he didn't have to look at him, have him see how pissed having him here made Jeremy. I'm cleaning. Yeah, I see that. You planning on keeping anything, or is it all getting recycled? What do you want, Omar? He demanded when the man was still there. I just want to check in on you, see if. And how did you even know I needed to be checked on, Omar? Do you have sensors in my room telling you everything about how I am? Is that some doctor's privilege, knowing everyone on the station's intimate feeling, or am I special? Omar's brown skin turned paler as he raised his hand. What the fuck? I don't know what's going on, but I don't deserve those accusations. That maybe you shouldn't have barged into my quarters. I was worried about, and I've told you I'm having a fucking bad day. How about you leave now and let me clean, or do you want more of my misplaced anger? Okay, Omar stretched the word, reaching back for the door's control. I'm going to let you work through it. How about I come back tomorrow? Hopefully you'll be in a more talkative mood. How about you never come back? But he was able to keep from saying it long enough. The door closed after the man left. He turned to find something else to shove into the recycler and saw the cube on the bedside table, the only item there. Just about the only item left on any surface in the room. There was no way Omar hadn't noticed it. Could he know what it was? Did he have access to the print records so he could find out Jeremy hadn't printed it? Fuck! He sat on the bed and stared at his hands. Then he laughed as he realized he missed the cat. He missed how it would make a nuisance of itself any time he was down and distract him. He wanted to hold it, feel it purr against his chest. Now he knew why Byron had hated him for being the reason the cat had been removed from their lives. He ran down the corridor, the floor, walls, ceiling shuddering as metal whined and snapped in the distance. His fault. It was all his fault, something said, insisted when he refused to listen. Turn around, it said. Oh, actually, this should not be capitalized. Sorry, italize. Turn around, it says. It said, and it's all ends. Turn around, and everyone will be safe. They could all go fuck themselves. The station shook. Why were they so far? Why was he so far? The lights flickered off, and in the silence, something growled. They were on. They were okay. Yeah. They came on the station, complaining against what was happening, and he almost stopped. Where had he come from? Ahead? Behind? Where would he be safe? Back. Should he? Something fluttered ahead, rose, with a line on it. Lines? He couldn't tell, but fluttering meant trees. He was getting closer to them, to him. Trees were around him, branches reaching down to grab him, keep him from proceeding. No, he yelled, his silence breaking the sound. He had to make it. He had to get through and reach. The metal floor made his head ring, but he forced the noise away, pulled at the branch holding his foot, brought a heel on it, and electronics went flying. He ran again, shouldering his way through the ever thicker branches. Banners were occasionally caught among them, and he followed where they led. They wanted him to make it through, even if the forest was no longer his ally. He fell due to the lack of resistance and hurried to his feet, ready to run again, but stopped at the sight before him. The majesty of the male, covered in tan fur, teeth bared, claws extended, gold eyes. Danger. He knew that. He knew this male was dangerous. A touch from those claws would cut him open. A branch touched his shoulder, urged him back, and the male's lips curled into a snarl to go along with the growl that resonated around him. Danger. The branch wrapped around his arm, but Jeremy pulled against it. The male launched himself, muzzle open, ready to bite and rip apart, claws glimmering in the light, gold eyes fixed on him. Death. He closed his eyes and stood his ground. He belonged here. Someone had told him once. His mother, he thought. He belonged here, and whatever would have happened, he welcomed it. He sat up with a gasp, trying to hold on to the memory. Strength, heat, comfort in the midst of danger. There was more, he was certain of it, but that was all he could pull. He fell back, called up the time, and chuckled. Way too early. He reached for the cube, wondering if it was responsible for the dream, and let go as soon as he touched it, thinking it burned his fingers. They were fine, but the cube was hot, far too hot. Corrigat said it had an upper limit. Was that what it meant? But why would it have to work harder now? Because he'd lost it on Omar. When had he ever lost it on him? He'd almost done it recently a few times, but has he had? But has he? As he had but the way he had last night, he'd clued the men on things not being the way they should, and he'd cranked up the subliminals. He hurried to shower and dress. He used a pillow to push the cube into his tool bag, and left his quarter for somewhere safe. If I ask you not to wake Thurrock, will you listen to me? He asked the guard. They were black and white furred, half the face, but even on the black side, the eye was surrounded by white fur. My orders are to inform him when you arrive. At least tell him he doesn't have to rush. I know I'm early. I'm going to go over some of the panels too. Just tell him not to rush. Jeremy headed for engineering while the Kelsirian spoke on his comm. Jeremy pulled himself within the reactor, concerned as to where Turek was. As much as he wanted him to stay home until the day started, he knew him well enough to expect him to join Jeremy as soon as he dressed, not even checking everything was on correctly. But he'd been here for 2 hours now, and still no sign of him. He disconnected the circuits, scanned them, and put them back in place. Let's change things a little bit. That's going to go up here. That's going to be its own, a new paragraph. As voice became audible, he compared them to the others. Handmade. Definitely handmade. Couldn't imagine the care it took to design and make this mini circuit by hand and have the tolerances be so close. He'd had prints with bigger differences. He'd printed them, and he'd print them, and they'd be ready for another set of tests. He pulled himself out as the sound he had warned the day had started. One of them noticed him, and the sense of camaraderie diminished. They weren't dour, but it was clear they couldn't be seen goof around. You know what? They couldn't be seen goofing around if with the boss watching. The engineer. Him. But where was Turok? He looked around and froze when, instead of Turok, he found Growler walking toward him. The man smiled at him, and those golden eyes shone. He said something. Hi. Jeremy replied, unable to look away from those eyes. Hello. They were so deep, so full of amusement, and... Growler chuckled, and Jeremy's face burned. I'm sorry, he hurried to say, looking down. I didn't mean to stare. Had Growler's chest always looked that firm? He looked further down, wishing Kelsirians wore shirts instead of open vests, and the bulge in those pants caused him to swallow and look at his feet. And look at his feet, hoping his pants didn't give away his reaction. Fuck. Was this why they made sure he wasn't attracted to other guys? This burning feeling couldn't be healthy. And how was he supposed to think, let alone do his job with him around, making him feel, are you all right? Yes, I'm fine. How could his face burn hotter at Growler's smile? How could Growler look so... He couldn't think of a word that did him justice. I'm glad. Jeremy shook himself. He was an engineer. That was the ship's captain. He couldn't behave this way. He swallowed. What can I do for you? So many things, Growler said with a soft chuckle. What? A smile filled with so many sharp teeth shouldn't be so dazzling. Shouldn't make him want to reach up, pull him close, and I will leave you to your work. Growler had said more, and he'd said something else. Jeremy was sure it had been important, but he'd been so lost in that smile. Wait! He was holding Growler's hand. He'd grabbed a hand of something dangerous, deadly. He could see the tip of those claws. Fuck, worse than that, he'd unceremoniously grabbed the captain. That had to be an offense, right? Something against rank? Yes. Then why was Growler smiling at him again? It was just as blinding without the teeth. He'd intended to say something. He was sure of that. A response to, he really shouldn't smile that much. It did something to Jeremy's thinking. He liked it, but it got in the way of thinking. The hand cupped his cheek. The skin was rougher than he'd expected, thicker, but the touch gentle. It did nothing to help him think. Nothing at all. Growler leaned in, and Jeremy closed his eyes. He'd never kissed anyone before. Not really. Not the way he was imagining it happening now. The way he'd seen it in movies. Even comedies could slow down for tenderness and kissing. Fur rubbed against his cheek, and someone let out a contented sigh. Jeremy opened his eyes when Growler pulled away and tried to tell him not to go, but his throat was too tight. That smile did something to him again. Then the hand let go of his cheek, and the ship's captain walked away. Jeremy touched his cheek as he watched him. It felt way too hot, but he didn't mind. Go, someone hissed, and Jeremy, startled to realize Thurrock was next to him. He pulled his hand down and straightened himself as best as he could. He hoped he wouldn't glance down. Good, you're here. I did a scan of the circuit. Go, Thurrock repeated, his tone insistent. I can't leave. We've got work to do. The Kelsirian sighed. Not leave. Go. He pointed to the archway where Growler could still be seen. What? No, I can't. We have work to do, and Thurrock grabbed his shoulders and locked eyes with him. There was so much intensity in them. Jeremy tried to look away, but couldn't. Yeah. I'm overcomplicating. Jeremy couldn't look away. Couldn't look away. You know what he is, Thurrock stated. You know what he means. You know what you fought for. You know where you belong. Here, he whispered, vaguely remember standing his ground. He'd fought to be himself, and Growler was... He wrenched himself out of Thurrock's hold and ran after his heart. And that concludes chapter 37 of The Captain's Heart. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is up on Ream Story. About, I don't know, 2, 3, at least a dozen chapters ahead. If for those who are up listening to these as they come out. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. Links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.